Hi guys, it's Danny. Alrighty, today we're going to discuss about NoID orchids and how to care for them if we don't know what they are. In the vast majority of cases, orchids that you purchase from local grocery shops or garden centers will come with no identification tags. All we might know is that it's a Phalaenopsis or a Cattleya or a Oncidium, but that's about it. Now for some of the orchids, it's not necessarily really important to know the identification because they pretty much take the same care. Let's take for example the Phalaenopsis hybrids. They all are Phalaenopsis, they're not intergeneric hybrids. The problem comes when you have intergeneric hybrids because those have in their parentage multiple species, so caring for them might differ depending on the variety. I'll take for example an orchid that I just received from my friend. It is absolutely spectacular. Sadly, I've been searching for this one for an entire day and I could not find it. It might just be an unregistered hybrid or a commercial hybrid. Nobody really bothers to name these hybrids or to register them. All we know is that this orchid is a Cambria orchid, which really doesn't tell us anything because Cambria orchids are really complex hybrids and they're not within the same species. This particular orchid might have Oncidium, Miltonia, and all sorts of other species crossed together. Now, identifying orchids is actually important for you as an orchid grower. I don't identify my orchids to include them in contests or stuff like that, and nor should you, because if you make a mistake, it's gonna be pretty embarrassing and a lot of trouble. But for your own personal research and knowledge, it's actually good to identify orchids as best as you can. Not only will you be able to make a little tag for the orchid so you don't forget how it looks like, or talk to somebody and specify what type of orchid you have to get better advice, but you can actually search for the orchid you have on the internet and actually find out its little quirks. There are a few orchids that have natural freckles, so if you search for videos, images, or forum discussions, you will learn that your particular hybrid is prone to having freckles, so you don't need to worry about fungal infections. You'll be able to identify a lot of quirks if you know the name of your orchid. But what happens if we absolutely cannot find the names of our orchids? How do we actually take care of these orchids if we don't know what they are? Well, the best strategy in this particular case is to learn from the orchid itself. Now, orchids do give you some hints of what they like, what they don't like, how they should be treated. All we need to do is pay attention. So today I'm going to tell you a few things about how I like to care for orchids that I don't know anything about, based solely on what the orchid tells me with its structures. So here is an example. I do have an ID for this orchid, but let's presume that I didn't know anything about this orchid. Now this is a Cattleya type orchid, and as we all know, Cattleya orchids do like tremendous amounts of light. However, I discovered that with this particular cross, which might be a complex hybrid, might be an intergeneric hybrid, I've discovered that the rules of normal Cattleya growing do not apply. First of all, this orchid does not like the same amount of light as other orchids. I actually placed this orchid in very bright light along with my other Cattleyas, and it actually got a little bit of a sunburn, and it's not freckles or anything of the sort, it is actual sunburn. So I can draw the conclusion that this orchid does not like the same amount of light as other Cattleya type orchids. Also, this particular one seems to have better blooms in low temperatures. They are more vivid, they have the splashes of color more defined and all of that, so I can assume that this orchid is not so tolerant to heat as other Cattleya orchids. So the first thing you can look at is the leaves. An orchid that cannot tolerate strong amounts of light will get redder faster, or will get some sort of spots, some sort of mini burns, let's call them like that. And this can tell you that this particular cross does not like the same amount of light as other individuals from its species. Speaking about leaves, they can also tell you if the orchid likes to be more moist than dry or if it prefers higher humidity. In the case of Oncidium intergenerics, this is actually really visible, and I have here an unidentified Oncidium intergeneric that actually tells me it likes to stay rather moist, and I can see that by the pleating of these leaves. I actually fixed this issue with providing more moisture in the media for this orchid. However, you will find those particular intergenerics that actually prefer higher humidity. And the leaves again will tell you this. If you provide enough moisture but the leaves still don't grow straight and beautiful, the orchid might actually need more air humidity, which is different from media humidity. Now, in the case of intergenerics, we cannot really generalize. I mean, if I have an Oncidopsis that really likes high humidity, I might have another Oncidopsis that is actually pretty tolerant to low humidity. And I'll give you an example. The Nelly Eiler, which is an absolute fuss about humidity, is now renamed Oncidopsis. However, the Bartley Schwartz Oncidopsis is really easy to care for, really forgiving, does not really fuss about high temperatures or low humidity. But they are both Oncidopsis orchids. So paying attention at the leaves can tell you quite a bit about the preferences of an orchid. Whether it's light, humidity, or even temperature, the leaves will actually show you what they like. Okay, let's move on to some other structures. The pseudobulbs of an orchid will actually tell you if the orchid likes to stay more moist as well. If you see that the bulb starts to shrivel, that is an indication that the orchid requires some watering, even if the media is not perfectly bone dry. There are those orchids who really do like moisture. So pseudobulbs can tell you if your particular orchid likes to stay more moist or more dry, and they can also tell you when to water the orchid. When you see that the pseudobulbs start to shrivel a little bit, it is time to water your orchid. Even if you don't have a schedule yet and you don't know anything about the orchid, pseudobulbs will definitely tell you when you need to water the orchid. Now, the roots of an orchid can tell you something about humidity and moisture as well. When the orchid is growing new roots, if the tips stop growing for a reason or another, it is safe to assume that that orchid prefers higher humidity or moisture. Roots usually stop growing due to two reasons. One would be inappropriate media or burning of the sorts, and the second would be not enough moisture. So if you look at the roots and you see that they're not growing properly, maybe your orchid does actually like to stay more moist, or you need to provide more humidity, or you need to water more frequent. Now, there's also the idea that light can actually affect the coloration of the leaves of an orchid. Well, this is both true and false. I don't actually consider it a reliable indicator. I'll tell you why. There are those particular species or varieties that naturally have lighter colored leaves. And also there are those varieties who have naturally darker leaves. So no matter how much light you give to this orchid, you'll never have really light green leaves. Also, the same can be said about this orchid. If it's in its natural habit to have lighter leaves, it will never have really dark leaves. I think light influences the coloration to a certain extent, but it's not always the case, so I'm not sure how valid this indicator is. And for this reason, I actually disregard it a lot of the times. So to recap, when you have an unidentified orchid, you need to first establish what species it is. Is it a sort of an Oncidium? It has pseudobulbs. Is it a sort of a Cattleya? Is it a sort of a monopodial orchid like a Phalaenopsis? And actually start to provide the care, the basic care that that particular species requires. And in time, just observe the orchid and see if it has some particularities that differ from the normal care you would give to that particular orchid. So the beginning is to offer basic care, and from there just observe the orchid, because it will tell you what it likes and what it needs. All you need to do is just pay attention and see the signs. Now, I did start a page on orchidnature.com. You can check it out in an annotation somewhere here, where I'm starting to identify orchids. It's going to take a while because I have a lot of orchids and I'll photograph them as they bloom. So if you want to check it out and see what orchids I have identified so far, you can check the link out and it will direct you to the page. Also, I will try to make a sort of unidentified section so you see the orchids. There will be no IDs, but I'll tell you some particularities. For example, this particular one seems to have is sort of a pigmentation on the pseudobulbs. This does not mean that it's rotting or that it's sick. It's just a natural pigmentation. And if you don't have enough experience with orchids, you might think this orchid is sick, when in fact it's just a natural coloration. So I think that will be useful even if we don't know the name. But I would like to give this orchid a name, so I will, let's say, baptize her Cora, because my friend got it for me and it's absolutely beautiful. I really don't think the camera does it any justice, but it's a really beautiful one. I think it's a Wilsonara vilstacara Oncidopsis, whatever they're called right now. I think it's a Wilsonara hybrid, and I intend to care for this one as for any other Wilsonara type orchid, and I'll see where that leads me. Alrighty, so thank you so much for joining. I hope this was useful to you. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and also share it with your orchid friends. If you'd like to see more videos from me, simply subscribe to my channel. I post on a daily basis. Also, feel free to leave me questions or suggestions for videos you might have in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you. If you click on the left side of your screen, you'll be directed to orchidnature.com, where you'll find care sheets, identification sheets, and also you can talk to us in the forum section. And on the right side of your screen, you can click to watch another orchid video. Thank you for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye!